Hello, and welcome to another Half Pint session. So today's guest I first saw on Barrel Age Faith, that podcast and video channel, and uh, his team reached out to me, and I really enjoyed watching that interview. So here he is, Michael Jefferies. Welcome to Pints with Jack.
Well, thanks for having me, David.
So would you mind just introducing yourself to our viewers? Who are you?
Yeah, so I'm Michael Jefferies. I'm author of The Good Steward. I write on Substack. Um, Most importantly, I'm a Catholic husband. I have a father of three girls, and I live in Indiana, and I've lived here my whole life, and absolutely love being here. And kind of my background comes from really working on political issues. So I started out working on political campaigns in college, and I continued working on those. I continue to be pretty involved. I'm the vice chair of our statewide organization of the Young Republicans here in Indiana. Um, but I kind of have maybe an unusual career path in that sense, and that professionally, for the last 5 years or so, I've worked largely on policy issues related to clean energy and environmental issues. And in my writing, I've really tried to address that more from a theological perspective and really trying to bring in the Inklings on that. Um, so I really try to work through kind of these various avenues to help conservatives recognize the value and the feasibility of making shifts in our energy consumption towards sources that bring about less pollution and help us to have a more sustainable world and future.
Hmm. Well, how did you first discover the Inklings, and how has your interest in them grown over the years?
Yeah, so probably like a lot of people. I mean, my first encounter with the Inklings was through my dad. I He read the Narnia stories to me and my brother growing up. And I loved them. And then reading The Hobbit to me. And then that was kind of like my first encounter growing up reading Lord of the Rings, loving Lord of the Rings, just thinking it was like this kind of cool fantasy story. But as time's gone on, I really became much deeper and more interested in my faith as I was leaving high school, entering college, and I'd had a lot of questions kind of as a teenager, wondering, like, is all this Christian stuff really true? I was raised in a Presbyterian background and household, and I had questions, and I wasn't really sure if there were good answers out there. But my dad directed me to C.S. Lewis, and so I started reading Mere Christianity. Was reading The Great Divorce, the Screw Tape Letters, like all these great works that he wrote around um, Christianity, and that was really key in helping me to like bring about this kind of thirst and hunger for theological work. So then I went on to study theology in college. I transferred schools because I wanted to go study theology. And it has really led me down this path of just seeking to follow God as much as I possibly can. And Lord of the Rings has been in that mix too, as I've reread it like probably 4 times now, and I've read and reread the Silmarillion multiple times, and they've all helped to like I've discovered that this thing that I thought was just this cool fantasy story as a kid is actually this much deeper story that brings a lot of life to me. Um, I also got directed to Dorothy L. Sayers by my dad as well. He had a collection of her essays called Creed or Chaos. And so I've never
Hmm.
read any of her plays or her detective mysteries or anything like that. I've only read this collection of essays that she wrote, which I'm sure very few people have read. Um, and there was one particular essay in there that was very impactful for me, especially when it comes to thinking about the environment and those kinds of issues. So, yeah, it's really been completely impactful. Like, I would say the Inklings have been um, pretty key to most of the major things that have happened in my life growing up, particularly when it comes to my faith and my work.
Hmm. Well, I can definitely recommend Dorothy L. Sayers' other work. Whose Body, A Gaudy Night, fantastic stories. And if you want to play, what C.S. Lewis used to do as part of his Lenten preparation is he would read her plays The Man Born to be King. And so
Yeah, I
I've
just
started
heard
doing the
about
same
those
thing.
for the first
Hmm.
time on Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World podcast, actually. And
Yeah.
I thought it sounded really cool. So that sounds worth it.
Oh, absolutely. And there was an annotated edition which came out from the Wade Center fairly recently that helps with a little bit more of the context and some of the other stuff that's behind it. Yeah, Lewis, that was his Lenten preparation. Well, it's actually he used to reread it during Holy Week, but apparently I'm busier, or maybe it's just because I have children, so I stretch it out to all of Lent, and I'm usually nearly finishing by the time Easter rolls around.
Yeah, yeah. You always have to remember when reading people like C.S. Lewis and the things they would do that, yeah, he didn't have any kids. So, like, he had a different kind of life.
True, true. Yeah. Well, since you also mentioned The Lord of the Rings and the Silmarillion, the Rings of Power, yay, nay, or meh?
I tortured myself through the first season, and I was really tempted. The devil was doing serious work on me, tempting me to just give the second season a try. But
Morgoth
I
is the
knew,
father of lies.
yeah. But I knew that if I do that, then like I'm just gonna continue to support the creation of sloppy uh representations of Tolkien's work. And for me, it's really about like, you have these stories, like I love Star Wars as well, and I love Lord of the Rings, and you have these things that, they're popular stories, but they do have this deeper meaning that resonates with people, that really connects with their life in profound ways. And I think it's very sad to see those things get just commercialized and turned into like just another piece of content to consume. So I would say nay, but I have been trying to figure out if Rings of Power season 2 is good. So then maybe I won't feel bad about watching it. But if it was good, I would watch it. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, for what it's worth, I watched season one. I literally fell asleep twice in two different episodes. So I didn't think much of the first season.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's not
This
that it's actually like horrible. It's just boring.
and that was kind of my impression of season two. I know that there's a big battle that comes up later because I abandoned it about halfway through season two. I just my wife lost interest. She didn't want to watch season two. I started and gave up about halfway through. I have met some people that say no, it gets more interesting, and the stuff around the manipulation involved in the creating of the remaining rings was good and stuff. But yeah, I don't have the energy for it. Maybe if I hear really rave reviews about season three, I will then come back. I will restart two, and then carry on to three. But at this point, my life is busy enough. I don't need any more.
Exactly. Yeah. For me, it's like that's how I'm trying to approach Star Wars from now on too. Like
Oh,
I've
I gave up.
slavishly
It's
watched
it's
all the slop, and now I'm like I can't take it anymore. Like unless
no.
something is particularly good that I hear about it without seeking it out, then I'll watch it.
Yeah, to my mind now, I just say there's the trilogy. I am going to raise my children to regard all other things as apocryphal. Some of the apocryphal items are a little bit more entertaining, like Andor,
Ender's good.
and the yeah, and the oh, what was the movie where they were actually stealing the Death Star plans? Rogue One.
Rogue One, the
Uh, that
inspiration
that
for Andor. Yeah.
that was entertaining enough. But as far, I'm going to raise my children to know it's canonical three. Everything else is apocryphal of various qualities.
Yeah, I've
But
come to love the prequels. I will say my
only
most
because the sequels
rewatched
were so
one is the
horrible.
episode 3. Um,
Yeah. Well, now that we've alienated everybody that likes the larger Star Wars canon and Rings of Power,
sure.
before we start specifically talking about how the Inklings have shaped you with regards to the environment, do you have a particularly favorite Inkling? And I will not be cutting you off if you say someone other than Lewis, although, I might turn the volume down a little bit. And is there a particular work that you come back to again and again?
Boy, well, when it comes between Tolkien and Lewis, it is very hard. I would say that Lewis is that one that I am like consistently coming back to. I rarely go more than a few months without reading or rereading something by Lewis.
Good answer.
Um, so I would have to say Lewis. Um,
Hmm.
he's more like your favorite comfort meal that's like good, whereas like Tolkien is like a rare steak and a fine glass of red wine. Um,
Hmm.
it's amazing, it's perfect, but like you can't have it every single day.
Yeah,
Um,
I feel that way about Les Miserables, the musical. I absolutely love it, but I can't go and see it too often or even listen to it too often. It's like it demands too much of me, and sometimes I don't have that emotion to give.
yeah, I get that. Boy, yeah, I saw Les Miserables in person for the first time last year, and wow,
Oh,
yeah,
wonderful.
I was in fits and raptures, and I'd already seen the movie and had listened to the recordings many times, but yeah, I can't listen to it all the time.
Well, let's now talk about environmentalism and the view of the environment and creation care.
Before we do
You've done
that,
a lot.
you asked me about
Oh,
my favorite work, and it is
oh yes.
Till We Have Faces.
Oh,
It's
okay.
Yeah, I had only read it recently, um, but I read it and I couldn't put it down, and I really felt like it was really like I'm sorry, it was really Lewis's like best work that he had written in my mind.
We have constant arguments about that, but I definitely think it's his deepest. How was your whiplash though? Because I agree, I couldn't put it down, and then I read through part two, and I was like, wait, what?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, I was like, the whiplash was strong. Um, I'm not an emotional person, but whenever I talk about the Inklings, I'll usually be like, "Yeah, it, like, brought me to tears," and, like, I don't ever cry, right? Like, this is not something I ever do, really.
Hmm.
But, yeah, I mean, like, I was in tears, I was like, my heart was stopping and racing at various points, like, throughout that, second switch, and yeah, no, I just thought it was such a beautiful, um yeah, the way it's, like, walking you through, this whole thing about, the value of ritual. And because there's this ritual that's being done in the temple, and like it appears to the main character, the queen, to be like just kind of this stupid superstitious thing that the priests are doing, but what they're actually
Mm.
doing is they're reenacting in kind of a silly way um the what actually happens to you when you die, like coming and being faced with these people who will come and tempt you, and it's very kind of like this like Eastern Orthodox toll booth idea of like the afterlife. um and then like reaching that point where you actually get to be like in the blessed state, um where everything kind of becomes clear. I was very moved by it.
And you're fortunate, if you read it very recently, to have tackled that further on in your experience of Lewis's writings. Um, for me, it was a little bit earlier, but still, I'd read enough of Lewis to understand some of the themes that he was incorporating into this book that he had spoken about in some of his essays, like Clear and Dark Religions. And so I felt better prepared for it. But every now and again, I meet somebody that says that it's one of the first books that they wrote, and I just don't know how you would even start trying to assemble an understanding of that book without knowing a good deal of Lewis's past canon.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, I did feel like it's kind of like, yeah, it's like the culmination and capstone of like everything else that he's been saying. It does feel like.
Mhm. Of course, his best book is The Great Divorce, but we can fight about that
Well,
later.
yeah, I mean, I just reread it. I mean, I probably reread that one the most.
I do also find that common. It's as a book that people return to. That and Mere Christianity are regular mentions.
Yeah.
But let's talk about creation care. How have the Inklings given you a framework to think about the environment in its entirety and the humanity's role in stewarding it?
Yeah, well, the first thing that I would say they did was really kind of help me to break out of a partisan way of looking at um, just politics in general, but really kind of like showing to me that Christianity and what it's calling people to is bigger than what the political battle lines of the day are calling them to be. So it's like, oh, the people who are kind of fighting against um, maybe rightly or wrongly, like various aspects of the environmentalist movement are also the side that like a lot of conservative Christians happen to be on. Therefore, conservative Christians are kind of like in this side of the people who are, seeking to develop everything as much as possible, all in the name of, economic growth and maximizing profits for businesses and all of these things. It doesn't mean that that's really the Christian call or way of looking at things. So I kind of first recognized this while reading Dorothy L. Sayers' essay in that Creator Chaos collection called Why Work? And what she starts bringing out is, she starts talking about you know, we're in wartime and we're experiencing these rations where we have to actually take care of our stuff and we have to fix our things when they break and we can't just consume as much as possible. And then she says like, she's like, it's hard to remember now, but like, can you remember what it's like before the war? And she kind of gave this description of um just extremely wasteful behavior that led to all kinds of environmental hazards. And her essay isn't about the environment at all, but the kind of the striking thing to me was here is this, you know, very conservative Christian woman really giving this kind of scathing critique of this overemphasis on consumerism as an economic model of essentially we just need
Hmm.
to keep consuming and consuming so that way we can just keep the economy growing and growing, whatever the consequences are for ourselves, our health, our souls, our the value and dignity of our work or the environment. It doesn't really matter as long as it's continuing to kind of push forward this economic growth. That was extremely eye-opening to me because I just, as a 17-year-old living in, this kind of the political culture of Mitt Romney, and it was like the Mitt Romney Obama years in the US here, and everything was about like all Republicans are is like it's for business, it's for growth, that's all we care about. Everything else like is just like needs to take the back seat. And to recognize that like no, there's actually a Christian way of thinking about these things in which like we can place a high value on the other aspects of life and recognize that that's kind of part of our call. So that was really kind of like the first piece. And after I read
Hmm.
cs or after I read Dorothy L. Sayers' essay and I continued reading C.S. Lewis and was rereading the Lord of the Rings, I kind of noticed this same line of thinking as being present in their works as well. So I would point to, for Tolkien, clearly like you have these two different sides and they couldn't really be more starkly different. You have the Shire where the people are, they're very pastoral, they're very simple, they're very content with the little comforts that they have. Um they They use the land, but they also aren't trying to extract every last ounce of value out of it.
Squeeze it. Mm.
And then you compare that to the orcs, right? To the orcs and to the mind of Sauron, who has, the mind of metal, and all he can think about is, you know, trying to doesn't see any value in the natural world and only sees the value in what it can be used for in the ways of kind of creating weaponry, allowing him to further dominate things. And so you have these kind of two sides placed against each other, and then the elves are also in there, right? In their ways of like living within forests, and where everything is placed like this high value on beauty, and all beauty is kind of a referent back to a natural beauty, which is a referent back to a supernatural beauty, which you find described and pointed to over in Valinor, where like kind of all the trees and all the best trees in the world really point to those two kind of primevally good trees, whose names are escaping me at the moment, that get destroyed by Morgoth and the giant spider,
Ungoliant.
Ungoliant or something. So, um, so you see this vision of what is a person called to do who's seeking to be a full, like living a kind of a full human life. And really that's kind of what I think of as being thought of when we're thinking about issues of like being called to live out the image of God. So as we're seeking to develop ourselves in the image of God, a part of all of that is focused on having like everything kind of in its right place and in its right order. So I really think that they're pointing us back to that vision that we see in Genesis 1, where God creates everything. He places man over it to be its steward, to be its he gives this person dominion, he gives man dominion over the world. But it's not a dominion to just dominate, because what God says is that everything in that order is good. Um and when man is at the very top, rightly ruling over it and taking care of it, it's very good. So I think that what Tolkien and Lewis are pointing us to, and Lewis does this as well in Narnia, um, which if we have time I can go into.
Mhm.
But you can see how they're really trying to show us that when humans are living kind of in this way of rightly ordering everything in creation, where people are being taken care of, and that really is most important. And I think that does have to be said as like, from a Christian point of view, the environment is not the end all be all, right? Like it has to be placed in its right order, right? So taking care of, loving God, loving other people, taking care of the poor, serving them, really are the most important. For people like us, it's living out our vocations as husbands and fathers. But going kind of beyond that, it's also about taking care of the non-humans under your care, making sure that there's enough, that we're taking care of the planet and the things kind of in our vicinity, so that way it's there for the next generation, it's there for our children, um and recognizing kind of a value in that. um so that's kind of those are my broad thoughts on the issue. There's other things that I'd love to bring up, but I want to give you some space to comment and give thoughts too.
Well, what it puts me in mind of is in Mere Christianity, when Lewis says, people say that the church should take a lead. And what they really mean is they want the bishops to go and do everything for us. Whereas what he says is what we need is Christian economists, Christian bankers, Christian finance people to apply Christian principles to their domain. And because that's also their area of expertise, that Christianity doesn't offer detailed plans for everything, but at least broad principles. Principally, love your neighbor as yourself, which we then have to try and work out within our own particular sphere and domain. So, I really want to hear about your thoughts on Narnia in particular, but more broadly, what do you think that looks like? And how should Christians think about and engage with issues related to the environment, both personally and politically?
Yeah. So I think when you're looking at dealing with these issues personally, I think that the first thing is like recognizing that what the things that you do matter. Now, like it's true, like you're not gonna solve like all global environmental issues by recycling your milk jugs. Um, but we also don't want to undervalue what we do. And what I really do think about that is that, you're when you're doing things like recycling, like composting, like seeking to, not be wasteful in your food consumption, not be wasteful in the way that you personally are, if you own a home, like you should be seeking to be using that land and space well. Um, Trying to not just you know have flowers and have gardens that you're seeking to and even like growing food. I know that's the thing that I'm wanting to work on. I did try this year and failed, but it was my first attempt at growing food. Um, but
Get chickens. My wife has had them for the past couple of years, and they've done us pretty well.
oh yeah, yeah. My mother-in-law has chickens, and we get eggs out the wazoo, which is wonderful for free.
Also, it's basically free babysitting for children because you can just like dump
Just
children
give
by
them
a
to the
chicken coop. They
chickens.
will be entertained for hours.
Well, that's
Far,
something to
far,
keep in
far,
mind.
far better than an iPad.
Oh yeah. Um so I think like just personally taking care of and stewarding your own things well, being involved in your community, asking yourself like, is there a park nearby like in my community that's like not being taken care of? Um like see if there's anything like people can do anything to take care of it. Like can you clean up the park together? Can you um there's more things that you can do when you're like actually organizing and like getting engaged in like local council meetings. But again, like that's not for everybody. Like I don't think that's on everybody's plate. I think what kind of everyone is called is to have kind of like a due respect and care for the things that are kind of like under their direct control.
That's what I was about to say. It reminds me of the principle of subsidiarity and Chesterton's localism. The idea that you do what is within your sphere of control.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that subsidiarity is really important when you're thinking about these kinds of issues. Now, when you are looking at I do think like this is what I do professionally, and I do think that there are people who are called to engage in this kind of at a broader scale politically, and the easiest thing that you can do without having a full time job in this is like going and speaking to your local representative, whether it's your member of Congress. They're not as hard to get a hold of as you think they are. Like if you and some constituents want to meet with your member of Congress and their staff, like they'll usually schedule a meeting with you. Um, Especially if you have a particular issue to talk about. There are good organizations out there that I think address these issues well and really from like a very solutions oriented kind of way. So one of them is an organization I used to work for called Citizens Climate Lobby. It's focused on just essentially giving ordinary people the abilities to go and talk to their members of Congress about these kinds of environmental issues and bring forth very concrete solutions for them. So, one of the things that we were advocating for is permitting reform. So, one of the things that makes it very difficult to build out new energy sources that aren't going to put out, um, serious forms of pollution is that there's a lot of government barriers in the way, which were put into effect for the purpose of protecting the environment. But now it's reached a point where they're actually dramatically slowing down the kinds of things that we need to do to protect the environment. So, like building out more transmission lines, which take energy from like where it's created to where it needs to be consumed. The big lines those can a new long distance line like that can take like up to 10 years to build, and a lot of that has to do with kind of the federal permitting process that goes along with that. So, and then also like making it easier to build out, all kinds of new energy sources or clean energy sources. Some of them aren't new, like hydroelectric power, advanced nuclear power. Um, so they advocate for those kinds of things, as well as simple market mechanisms that would help to like recognize the environmental damage and kind of price that into the economy writ large, um, which is essentially um, it's a price on carbon emissions, kind of like from where they're generated, and then it essentially places a tax on the companies that make like fossil fuels and those kinds of things, and then that leads to a price increase in the sale, and that kind of trickles down throughout the economy. So things that use products are made in a way that are less emitting of carbon, they're cheaper products, and that incentivizes people to buy them. And then consumers get protected by a rebate essentially that they would get um, through their taxes. And it kind of equals out for the average consumer to be kind of a wash economically, but incentivizes the cleaner economic choices. So like those are some like practical ways to engage in that. Another excellent organization is the American Conservation Coalition, and they are specifically kind of focused on addressing things like from a conservative perspective, recognizing the value and just protecting God's good creation and keeping things clean. They have chapters organizing kind of all over the country now. So the Citizens Climate Lobby. Um, so you can look them up. So that's how I would recommend engaging on these politically. When it does come to, it's helpful to be part of organizations who are going to be formulating good, politically viable solutions that both sides of the aisle can get on board with. So that way, you're not just feeling like you just have to figure out everything yourself or go along with some of the crazier ideas that people like C.S. Lewis certainly would not have been in favor of. Putting everything in the hands of the planners and the controllers. But there are good solutions out there. You just need to kind of find the right people who are advocating for them.
Hmm. I think one of the other tricky issues is also when people disagree, because two people can agree that there is a social ill that needs addressing, and they can each come at it with their own solution. I mean, you mentioned nuclear power earlier. Personally, I'm a big fan, but I've met people that don't want to touch it at all. And so you've got to find a way of dealing with each other charitably when you're both coming up with what you think are potential good faith solutions to a problem that you both agree exists, but you actually can't agree on how it should be fixed.
Yeah, well, that's a better place to be in, is arguing about solutions rather than the problem itself, whether it should be addressed. Totally agree. I think another thing when it comes to Christians engaging with this issue is to like not fall into like the camps of two extremes, where like one is to say like I don't care about this issue at all, like you know that's just for you know people who care about the environment or nature worshippers or whatever, like things that I hear. um but also the other extreme would be to say like to like really grow kind of like in despair about the issue. There's a very significant number of young people specifically who um, have like what they call climate anxiety, and like they are literally like they find it impacts their daily life because they're so concerned about these things. And I think that's another thing that the Inklings can really help us with, is finding hope when things feel challenging. Tolkien in Lord of the Rings really provides this kind of model where like it's incredibly pessimistic, right? Like there's no like there's no illusions out there that like if we just like get the right people in the right places of power, putting in the right policies, then like now the world is going to be perfect. It's just like instead like the view is like we're just going to try to do the right thing, and it probably won't work, but we're going to trust that everything is going to work out in the end. And I think that like you just have to recognize that like yeah, God's in control. Like he's going to make sure that regardless of how bad things get, regardless of how bad things might look or people say things are, there's no reason to despair or lose hope. God will come and bring new life to all things and all people who put their trust in him. So I think that that's really like the most important thing that Christians need to keep in mind when thinking about this in all political issues, really.
All we can do is do well with the time that's given to us.
Exactly. Thank you, Gandalf.
Is there anything else? Is there anything else you'd like to mention before we wrap up?
Um.
How people can get hold of you, read what you've written.
Oh yeah. Well, people can read what I've written by finding me on The Good Steward on Substack.com. I've had a new child and I've switched jobs within the last 4 months. So my time for writing
You look far more rested than you should. I'm just saying.
yeah, we sleep great actually. My 4-month-old has not woken up in the middle of the night since like she was 3 weeks old. So
it's coming.
So I don't have the time for writing in which I'd like to, but I am proud of what I've put out so far, and I have further ideas that I'm going to continue working on, writing about ways in which Christians can think about issues around the environment and living out their becoming the full images of God that they were created to be, and how care for creation fits into that. So you can find that
Wonderful.
there. And that's really the main resource. I don't do social media really, and
Quite right.
yeah, would just point people to those environmental organizations.
Wonderful. Well, there'll be links to all of that in the show notes. Michael Jefferies, thank you for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, David. This was great.
And we'll have you back and we'll dig into a little bit more of Narnia next time, I think.
I would love to do it.
Viewers, please join us again next time when we'll continue going further up and further in. Cheers.